Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 45. Frigga and Bylster. Frigga was well pleased. The trip to Svartalfheim, while brief, had accomplished what it needed to. The dwarves were now warned and had pledged their assistance in defending Midgard. Now, however, the truly monumental task would begin. Frigga turned her mind towards their next destination as Sleipnir climbed toward Svartalfheim's Bifrost landing site. Dealing with the Jotuns was not going to be easy. There had been a time when Asgard and Jotunheim had had good relations, but that era had been on the wane even before the Jotuns went to war. By the time they'd invaded Midgard, both sides were more of a mind to kill each other on sight than talk. There had, after all, been a reason that Frigga had beaten Odin to a pulp when he'd stolen a Jotun child, regardless of who their parents were. She had hoped that they might reforge a more peaceful relationship with the Jotuns through Loki. Of course, Odin had to go and wreck that hope as hard as possible with the way he handled Loki. Frigga had done what she could, especially since she'd come to love Loki as if she'd borne him herself, but unfortunately it hadn't been enough. Thankfully, it appeared that the damage done to Loki was not permanent and irreparable, which was really the only reason Frigga hadn't killed Odin when she'd got him trying to renounce Thor and Loki. Frigga had no idea who was on the throne of Jotunheim. With the casket gone from the realm, it didn't even have to be someone from their royal line, since anyone clever and capable enough could make a claim of leadership and gather enough followers to usurp the throne. With the destruction that had been wrought in the throes of Loki's madness, even a usurpation might not be necessary if all those of royal blood were killed in the cataclysm. Asking Heimdall, who had taken the Jotun throne, would have been nigh on useless. Most of Jotunheim's capital city had been destroyed in the cataclysm, and the survivors scattered to the winds. Whoever was leading them, they were not doing it from a central, obvious location, so Heimdall's chances of discerning who was leading and from where were not good. Once they reached the landing site, Frigga shook off her thoughts and regarded Lady Sif and the three. "Gird yourselves against the cold," she told them, and followed her own advice, pulling Jotunheim-proof winter gear from her pack and beginning to don it. What they were currently wearing, while proof against the chill of Svartalfheim's heights, was insufficient to protect them from Jotunheim's cold. "And I will remind you that while we are on Jotunheim, you are to neither speak nor raise arms against the Jotuns save by my order. We are on a mission of peace, and I will not have your intemperance causing more difficulties." She leveled them with a flat look, but forbore to lay out the consequences of disobedience. From their expressions, they were all quite aware that they would not like the results if they defied her. Once they were all clad in heavier cloaks and other winter gear, Frigga spoke again. "Heimdall, Jotunheim, if you please." Moments later, they were all but on the doorstep of the old, now mostly ruined capital city of Jotunheim. Glancing behind them, Frigga saw why they had been placed so close to the ruins. The ice shelf that had been served as a landing site had been completely destroyed. The cliff edge, once more than 2 or 3 miles distant, was now a matter of a few dozen yards from the edge of the ruins. In the wake of the death of Laufey and the near destruction of their realm via the Bifrost, the succession of leadership had very nearly been an afterthought. The survivors had been entirely too busy healing, finding shelter, and rebuilding their lives. By whatever miracle, both Bylster, Helblindi, and their parent Farati had survived the mayhem. They had initially fled in 3 different directions with whatever survivors they could gather, fearing the appearance of an Asgardian army. Some months later, when it became clear that no such army would be arriving, they had taken the chance to meet, briefly. In that meeting, it had been decided that they would remain separate so as to make it that much more difficult for the royal line to be wiped out. Each kept but a small contingent of Jotuns with them, and word went out that at no point were more than 50 Jotuns to gather together in any one place. It was the only thing they could think to do to prevent the genocide of their race, if Odin was of a mind to wipe them out. Many parents had sent their young to the coldest areas of other realms via the secret paths as further insurance against such a fate. Traveling the secret paths was fraught with danger, but better the children be essentially exiled to other realms, and thus keep their people alive, than for all Jotuns to be wiped out in strike. The three had decided that all three of them would rule their people. They would remove themselves as far from one another as they could manage, and rule over whatever number of their people were in residence within a certain distance of their new accommodations. Contact between them would be rare and undertaken only by messengers, never in person. Such a method of ruling would have been impossible if they still had the casket, as it recognized only one master at a time. But with the situation the way it was, it would work. Bilestir, as the younger of Laufey and Farbati's children, had taken up residence closest to the remains of the capital city. Even at that, the accommodations were hidden in the mountains several miles away from the ruins. Bilestir had also taken as many of their warriors as were willing to stay near the ruins, since this was the most likely area for an invasion force to land. Together they kept a careful watch over the ruins. Bilestir had just finished the midday meal when one of the guards set to watch the city ruins came racing in.
"My liege, the Bifrost. 5 have landed. Sleep near among them,"
the guard reported as they skidded to a halt a few feet away.
Bilestir sat bolt upright. "Sleipnir? You're sure?" "Very, my liege. It is a distinctive creature,"
the guard said with a nod. This was true, Bilestir knew.
"Were you close enough to see who accompanied Odin?"
"No, my liege. I think at least one of them was one of the soldiers that accompanied Thor when they were here last. At least they had a similar bulk to them." The guard motioned a rotund shape. "The others I could not distinguish any distinctive characteristics. They were too far away." Bilestir sighed. "If the fat one is with Odin, then the others are likely the rest of the soldiers that accompanied Thor. Apparently, they go everywhere together. You did not see Thor, though?" The guard shook his head. "No, my liege. Thor is kind of hard to miss." "No kidding," Bilestir said bitterly, and stood up. "I want 6 warriors to accompany me, and 6 more to sneak around the Asgardians to attack them from the sides if needs be. And the rest of you, prepare in case there are more arrivals." He pointed to a slender, long-legged youth. "You, make haste to Helblindi's stronghold and tell them that we have Asgardians on our doorstep." The youth nodded, turned, and bolted out of the room. It would be at least a 2-day journey to Helblindi, but if worst came to worst, at least Helblindi would be warned, and could warn Farbati in turn. Bilestir, the additional warriors, and the guard made their way back to the ruins. By the time they'd gotten there, the Asgardians had begun to make their way across the ice, away from the ruins. It was not until Bilestir was almost upon them that he realized that the person riding Sleipnir was not, in fact, Odin. Jotuns, unlike most of the being of the 9 realms, did not have 2 separate sexes with distinctive physical characteristics. They, in fact almost all animal life on Jotunheim, were, by the language of some other realms, hermaphrodites, possessing both male and female reproductive systems. They had further evolved so that all such things were either fully internal or able to retract into their bodies to protect them from the cold. When among other races, they had used sex-specific pronouns for the convenience of their hosts, but their native language had no such words in it. This, and the size of the average Jotun, had led to residents of the other realms assuming that most Jotuns they met were males. Such interactions had all but ceased a millennium ago when Odin took the casket. As a result, most young Jotuns had a lot of difficulty telling one person from another realm from another unless there was something truly distinctive about them. Odin, and his appearance, was burned into Jotun memories. Sleipnir was likewise distinctive, and had until now only been seen with Odin mounted upon him. When the guard had seen Sleipnir, they had assumed. They had also been far enough away from the landing site that visually confirming a different rider would have been impossible. The sight of someone other than Odin astride Sleipnir made Bilestir motion for the warriors and guard to fall back slightly. While such a thing would make it look like Bilestir was approaching alone so as to play nicely, which happened to be at least partly true, it also kept the warriors further out of the range of fire, because there was no telling what was going to happen if they were facing Odin's... What? His successor? A usurper? There was no way to know. Then the figure astride Sleipnir pulled back the furred hood protecting them from the cold. "Greetings. I am Queen Frigga. I come in peace to treat with whomever has succeeded Laufey on the throne of Jotunheim." "Frigga?" Bilestir thought in surprise. Wasn't that the name of Odin's mate? Insofar as Bylastir knew, no Jotun had ever laid eyes on Frigga. That said, Frigga had a reputation for being forthright, fair, and slow to antagonize others. Bylastir didn't believe for a minute that they really wanted peace, not after what had happened, but at least Frigga was unlikely to rain down more destruction on them.
I am Bylastir, child of Laufey and Farbati, Bylastir said. I have authority to treat with any who would.
Bylastir glared at Frigga and the other four.
The question becomes whether or not I wish to. Asgard's crimes against my realm and my people are numerous, and by all rights I should kill you where you stand in recompense for the life of my parents and the dozens who were killed by the Bifrost.
The four riders behind Frigga shifted uneasily, but did not raise arms.
Frigga herself didn't so much as twitch. We are agreed that Jotunheim has a myriad of legitimate grievances against Asgard, Frigga said, though it is my hope that we can reforge at least some sort of peace between us. Odin has been banished from the realm for his crimes against your people.
An odd expression flitted across Frigga's face, but Bylastir hardly noticed. Bylastir was too busy being stunned speechless at Frigga's admission. Odin? Banished? What in the name of Surtur's flame had happened in Asgard? Bylastir didn't believe the banishment had been solely due to crimes perpetrated against Jotunheim either, though Bylastir was willing to believe that those crimes had played a part in the banishment. After a few moments, Bylastir managed to regain some equilibrium and spoke.
Perhaps, Queen Frigga, I will treat with you after all,
Bylastir said.
You will follow us. This area is no longer stable, and even if it was, there is no shelter from the elements to be had here any longer. Our accommodations are not too far from here, however.
Frigga and the four followed Bylastir tamely enough. There was more than a little nervous twitching from the four when the warriors that had deployed themselves out of sight to the sides of the Asgardian group joined Bylastir's group, surrounding the Asgardians. Frigga never so much as blinked, and Bylastir felt some small measure of respect for the Asgardians' ability to retain composure in the face of tense situations. Bylastir and the other warriors kept well clear of Sleipnir. That creature was well known to act preemptively in the defense of Odin, and Bylastir for one was not going to presume it would not do likewise for Frigga. It took but a surprisingly short amount of time to reach the shelter of the mountain caves that were Bylastir's stronghold.
Sleipnir will have to remain here,
Bylastir said when they were within the first cave.
The caves are not set up to accommodate a four-footed creature its size.
They had the headroom necessary, to be sure, but not necessarily the room Sleipnir would need to walk around and turn around. Bylastir led the way into the cave that served as their meal hall. It was the only cave with a table large enough to accommodate everyone. Bylastir sent several youths running to get platforms and furs for the Asgardians to sit on, while they sat in the chairs, since the chairs were built for Jotuns and would dwarf the Asgardians. It did not take long for the five to be settled. The four guards, Bylastir had decided to think of them as such, since he was unsure of their true purpose here, were staring around with suspicion and caution. Frigga, on the other hand, seemed completely unconcerned with the idea of being surrounded by Jotun warriors.
It would seem, Queen Frigga, that there is much to discuss between us, Bylastir said. Perhaps you would like to start?